Thank you for tuning in to another episode of PERC Up with the President. And again, when we talk about PERC Up, when we really truly speak about PERC, we're thinking about persistence, enrollment, retention, and completion. And when you add those elements together, we're really talking about student success. And on this episode, I have Steve Thompson with me, who is a librarian and a faculty member here at Rock Valley College. And so what I'm going to do first is I'm simply going to have Steve introduce himself. And after he introduces himself, I'm going to have him answer a simple question in his own words. What is a librarian?
So I'm Steve Thompson. I've been a librarian for a career that spans from 1983 until retirement, and probably be a librarian for the rest of my life. And I would say my work at Rock Valley started almost as a impromptu visit to the library, and I was not employed at the time, and I talked to the director, and I learned that she had a position available as a person helping with assistive technology. And so I started in that area. And a lot of things that I've done over the course of my career have been special needs. So providing accommodations for students in terms of reading and using resources. So that's been a theme throughout my life. As an outreach librarian, I started at Rockford Public Library, and I worked numerous aspects of the job in the library branches. I was known by the inmates as the jail librarian, so I worked at the county jail, and I worked with special groups like older adults who we delivered material to in their homes. And about 12 years into that, I really had a change in my family situation, and I needed to basically resign and take some time to find out what I was going to do. And so that's what brought me to Rock Valley College. And so I would share with you that I am not far from the tree in terms of the leaves that drop. Both of my parents were librarians. So there's a joke, there's a children's book about the boy who was raised by librarians. Well, that was Steve Thompson. And I would never, in my earlier years, ever want to accept that I would be a librarian. That was just not going to happen, but it did. So, and it was a calling, because I was very close to libraries, and it just was in my blood. So that's my background, and I know that's a little bit more than you needed to know, but that's perfect. Personal. That's personal reflection. And so a librarian is, depending on the setting, is someone who provides the right combination of scholarship or information to a person based on their point of need. And they do that through collecting material, curating material sometimes in terms of choosing points of view, multiple points of view, and in a college environment that does involve one-on-one instruction, and it involves classroom instruction, and more so, it involves providing material and ways to acquire information electronically or digitally through distance learning and some other tutorials. So that's that's the short of it in terms of the definition of a librarian. But I'm hopefully able to give you some more information about, and then you ask, what do you do all day? And Well, that's another question. Yeah.
Well, the question I do have right now, you mentioned that you were a librarian in the Rockford Public Library, correct?
Correct, yeah.
All right. So then you took some time off, and then you came over to RVC Library.
Right.
What's the difference? What's the difference between being a librarian at Rockford Public Library in your time when you were there compared to RVC librarian? What is the difference between librarian for the community versus librarian primarily for students?
Well, the difference is that the audience and the environment. So public libraries would have a different focus. I would say the focus for an academic library is to support students in their coursework, and so providing material that's academic related. In the public library, it serves cultural needs, it serves recreational needs and informational needs, but it's a little bit narrower focus with the academic library in terms of there's a definite focus on the curriculum of the college. And interestingly enough, I've worked with some of our career programs, so our students are not traditional in most senses, and I found that was an excellent fit because I was working with a lot of non-traditional groups at Rockford Public Library. And I always said the brightest spot at the county jail was the GED program that Rock Valley College was responsible for offering. And that was one of the sparks that I saw, is that when students in that classroom could see that they were learning or taking some control of their lives, it just made a big difference in the whole environment and in their own outlook. And so the library itself was not a library you visited, but it was a library that we would take the books to the cell blocks. But the space where the books were stored was right next to the GED classroom. So I got to hear the interaction and the teaching that was going on, when I was doing some processing work in the jail library. And so it was really a bright spot. And so, I was seeing Rock Valley College at work at that point. And I think I know there's other initiatives that the college is making now in terms of the career training that's going on. So it's very encouraging. Yeah.
Steve, yeah, you and I have interacted on several occasions, in and out the library or something like that, or maybe you're asking a question. And, for the most part, you always keep this poker face. You have this poker face. So, but I saw a spark. I saw this spark when you were talking about GED and engaging and things of that. So now I'm curious, when you come to work daily and when you're engaging, connecting with students, what is your favorite piece about that? What keeps that spark going?
Well, the students that are developing in their awareness of what a library is encouraging to me, because they're not necessarily the most experienced with libraries, and now a physical library is probably not as much of their skill set. They just haven't been dealing with libraries in high school and throughout their lives. So I have found, as a more traditional person in the physical library, that having them start to understand an organizational process of the library and seeing their mastery of that and mastery of research as a process occur is encouraging. And the fact that as I interact, I offer a forum for them to state what their research question is, and then we discuss, if they don't have a research question, what their passion is. And so I start to hear the lives developing and the future goals. And so I feel that I'm touching the future. And so that's a motivation that keeps you going, because you could see yourself years ago in those developmental, you're not young, but you're a young adult and you're exploring a lot of areas. And so, and just hearing and encouraging people that want to share how that paper went. What did the professor think? So those are the kind of rewards that keep you engaged in your work. And it is an interpersonal process. And so while there is a lot of behind-the-scenes work that we're doing in terms of creating the right platforms for students to use and to acquire resources, I think it's always good to get that feedback, that sense, even if it's like a chat that we have or a phone call. Yeah, you really are helping me understand this. Thank you so much. I'm hearing acknowledgement, yeah, that they get it, and that's a meaningful feedback. So you like to hear that, of course, and so that's a very important part of my life, in terms of getting some feedback and acknowledgement, that progress is being made.
I appreciate you sharing that. It's important, feedback and engagement for both the professional and the student.
Yes.
It's important for both, right? And I appreciate that. You mentioned earlier that, I want to make sure, you were a librarian since '83 or librarian at RVC since '83?
No, I was a librarian at Rockford Public Library since '85. And my first work was at a university library in Wisconsin. But I worked at Rock Valley since 1998. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Steve, how many lives do you believe you've impacted through being a librarian?
I don't know. I don't know. It seems to me that that's thousands of lives, and I don't remember names. So I do have students that remember me, and they're pretty encouraged when we have an interaction. So that's quite enjoyable. And there are alumni that I have engaged just through interaction, through email, and that's pretty fun, because one woman who's a poet now in Oregon, she was able to dedicate a poem in the time capsule, and so I encouraged her to contribute something, and so and she said, I used to hang out at the library, which is a good thing, She said it was my favorite place. So she connected, and she had a book of poems that she would like the library to add to the collection. And I said, this is a perfect opportunity for you to be part of history. So her video is in the time capsule. So, yeah.
Well, when you said that she used to hang out at the library, when I was in college, we had two libraries.
Okay.
We had the physical library,
Yes.
right? And then we had the library that was across the street from the campus.
Okay. And was it the public library? Or
No.
No?
More of a watering hole.
Oh. Okay.
But it was called the library.
Oh, it was called the library.
It was a library.
Oh,
So
okay.
some students would literally just tell their parents they were hanging out at the library.
Oh, okay. Okay.
It reminded me of that. Now, it's no longer there anymore on that campus, or close to that campus, but it used to be a running joke for some students.
Well, that's, and I can I like that one. hanging out at the library is probably in the past, to tell you the truth. But when I interviewed students and I asked them, it was part of the student executive committee, which I did about 3 years ago. They really liked, and they were talking about the library in very positive terms. They liked the space. They liked the study rooms that we have on second floor. And when it came to things that they would like it to be a watering hole. They would like Meg's Daily Grind, and they didn't say beer, but they did say to have coffee right in the library. So that was something that was mentioned. And so the library is a comfortable place to be, and a little less formal than the stereotypical place where you meet. You have a place away from distractions, but you're also able to be there and to be seen. And so I can tell that a student might want to be seen by where they sit. So if they sit if they sit right close to the windows, they want the friends to see them, that they're here. But if they want to just hibernate and be in a place where they can, have no distractions, the library has that. So there's a lot of different spaces in a physical library. Now it's a different situation where you're dealing with a remote situation, which students don't have the opportunity to interact or to use a physical space as a way of connecting to the campus. So I'm looking forward to, as we all are, to changes in our COVID-19 restrictions going away. So going away in 2021, hopefully. Yeah.
Hopefully we have a lot to look forward to
Yeah.
in regards to post-COVID, maybe?
Right.
Dare I say it?
Yeah.
In 2021.
Yeah.
Steve, you mentioned the physical space of the library.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you make the physical space of a library relevant in a digital world?
That's the greatest question that you can ask, because you've identified the fact that a library is no longer in the term repository in terms of books and a need for massive collections. In the day that I began my library career, it was a status symbol to have as large and as many volumes in the library as possible. Well, that day is past. But in the university, the library serves as a central place, a place where exchange of ideas occurs. As I alluded to, mentioned earlier, not so much as a place where you connect with people. And so the role of a library like that is in the future, because there does need to be a place where people interact and a space where ideas are exchanged. And a lot of universities and colleges are changing the dynamics of the space. So I responded fairly strongly a year ago when we had a facilities master planning process where we looked at how to change the space within the library. Mm-hmm. But some of the dynamics are that students, as they work now, they like a little bit of an edge in terms of chaos. They like a busyness to their environment and an impromptu. So redesigning and making room for that kind of interaction is the future of a library space. Not adding shelves but taking shelves away. And so I see that as a learning commons in terms of providing spaces where you can use technology and work on group presentations. And actually, in terms of using a library, it's the creative process. So when you take in the maker space and this media lab that we're recording in, those are the that's a huge aspect of the future of a library. So as these things can roll out in the future, I see that as extremely valuable, and it syncs up with the function of a library. So we're not, we're using many technologies or many forms of media. We're using, technology in order to accomplish that end. So,
are you suggesting like a cafe inside the library? Like this place where, because you mentioned sort of that coffee and that atmosphere, that learning atmosphere.
I don't think that's far removed from what it could be or should be. I think that informality is available, given the fact that you're not going to stain any books because you're not, that had been probably a concern in the past, but now we're using different technologies and different ways to convey information. So the futurist would probably hold that there's always going to be a place for publishing and for credibility in terms of the information that students are able to obtain through the library resources. And so we don't want to let go of the fact that the library has a role in providing credible information for free because a student pays tuition. And so it's not going to be a good thing if, for example, research requires you to pay $25 for a paper. You've encountered that, I'm sure, when you've been in school. Well, you go to the library and say, no, isn't this part of what I'm paying my college dollars for? And so that's what our library budget is expended on, is the digital resources for students. But I guess the dreamers would say there really is a way to kind of flip the idea of a library space as a very formal, quiet, poker face, just to flip that and to turn it on its end a little bit. I think that's always a good thing to generate interest and change, and not to be tied to rigid, rules and regulations that have always been it's always been that way.
So you said that a year ago or so, when there was a facilities master plan discussion, it sounded like you gave them the business a little bit.
I sure, well, yeah, they heard some soapbox. They heard some soapbox. Yeah, and so how does that translate? If you would use currently the space that we have for tutoring and the writing center needs to be more visible. Mm-hmm. So in February 2020, we began what we called pop-up sessions, and they were held in the space, in the Commons, the AmCore Commons, and it was essentially to reach out to students in a sort of a busy space where you're coming and going, but that was the nature of offering assistance. So a librarian and a writing coach were available, and so that form of service is what we offered then. Mm-hmm. And so we see that as a model for offering more. And And it's not so important that there be, quiet. There should be zones where you can concentrate. So establishing a part of the library that has a quiet area, so that students can study that way. But then there's like a busy zone, or there's an interactive zone. But I felt that the space itself is aesthetically, it's gotten all kinds of recognition as a very aesthetically pleasing space. And I think you'd agree when you're close to the windows and if you're looking out at the creek and you might have gotten a bad grade on your test, you still can reflect, and just there's some beauty to the fact that you're in a space that's very positive. So I don't want I wouldn't want all of that to be lost by all of a sudden changing the freely available space for students to gather and to study, and turn it into a program space where it becomes a tutoring, exclusively for tutoring. And so I reacted strongly against that by saying, why not provide a kind of a democratic process of this is the student space, rather than have it become a programmatic space where there's offices and things like that. And some of that was being discussed, and I wasn't too happy about it, because the architect's vision was provide aesthetics and provide a dedicated space, rather than morph too many functions into one space. And so I got my drawings out, and I said, I think the tutoring center should be, yes, it should be on the front end of the building, and it should be very visible, but it shouldn't overwhelm a current library space. So it's kind of being territorial. But I don't think that within the space itself, that free association and exchange of ideas should be just eliminated. So it's a different. So I had some strong reactions. I don't know if Beth Young heard my reactions. You can ask her. She might not remember, but I think she probably knows who the suspect was that was speaking up about
I will
the
not
library.
ask her.
Okay.
Shh, we won't ask her.
Okay, don't
all right?
ask her.
No, but I do have another question I have to ask you. And that laugh right there, that's why exactly I was going. Who or what gives you the belly laugh? Random question, I know. But the belly laugh, where does that come from? Is there a certain topic? Is there a certain person?
No, I think it's the kind of conversations that we're having, that it's creative, it's engaging, and it actually makes a little fun of, you made a little fun of me, and I can laugh at myself. So I think laughing at myself is actually one of the best medicines that I can have. And so it's nice to have a foil, in terms of drama, like you. And so I think I'm the straight man, and so I think that interactive stuff, and I remember some professors who would, I would be teaching a class, and they would ask a question like that, and just out of the blue, and said, I started to laugh because it was just.
So I know we have to close soon, but I have to ask you one more question, all right? Or at least give you a chance to respond to one more question, all right? Okay. You're leaving us soon. Mm-hmm. Is that correct? Yeah. What is it, in your reflection, because you're a very reflective person, what is it that you want to share? Or is there anything you want to share that you reflected on that you want to share to your colleagues?
Well, I just, this afternoon I had a chance to to watch the graduation at Rockford University, the December graduation. And it was particularly meaningful to me because I had known a student who graduated. He expressed interest in one part of my job, which was the archives. And he successfully graduated both from Rock Valley and from Rockford University. His ability to connect and the support that he received from the college was very important to him. And I do a contrast and I say, how could another student who in previous years, maybe I was an orientation leader in 2000 through 2004 during the orientation, so I met some students. And then I followed one student and I really took an interest in him. And things didn't click. He did not continue past his maybe first year or first semester at Rock Valley. And I think that is the kind of question that I'm asking myself and saying, it is about support. It is about connecting to students. And so if there's ways in which I could have been more encouraging to the student, if there's supports that the college would have. But I also think that there's a lot of fear among students in terms of dealing with concerns that they have about education. And I'm sensing that there's probably just a need on our part as a campus to work with the student as they present themselves and to be as encouraging as we can in terms of just dealing with the fear. And sometimes that could be confrontational, as you confronted the fact that you just don't like me, not smiling enough. But, or it could just be acknowledging and being present with the student in terms of being concerned that you want them to be successful. So that is a reflection of a success completion in, I wouldn't call it a failure. It might be that the person had different goals in mind, but from an outward sense, we would like people as they encounter us and come to our campus to persist and to continue their education. So I guess I'd leave that, as an open-ended question. Are we aware of students? Are we open to the conversations that might be encouraging? Maybe, as you've shared, just having how is it going kind of conversations, kind of randomly being available for those conversations rather than looking so busy and being so concerned about our own things that we're not taking time. So,
Steve,
yeah.
Thank you so much for allowing us to, take a glance from your lens, your perspective on engaging students, but also thank you for your professionalism and for your work at Rock Valley College. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
You're so welcome. And so we have another episode in the books regarding PERC Up with the president. And when I truly listen to Steve and I reflect on our conversation, I think quietly engaging. He has this engaging personality, and he's reminding us of the importance of being present with students, and he's reminding us of the importance of meeting the student where he or she's at, and the importance of that, even when we're uncomfortable interacting with a student who is frustrated, that student may have a fear as well. fear that they may not be competent in having a conversation with somebody with the qualifications that we may have as a professional. And so we have to take those things into consideration, simply not just having an interaction that's tutoring or teaching basis, but how about just organically having a conversation to find out if that student is doing well and genuinely meeting it. Student success, PERC up, persistence, enrollment, retention, completion, all of it is important. And we have to continue to do it at Rock Valley College. So thank you again for listening and tuning in, and have a great day.